Hello and welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host Gordon Smith and I'm joined as usual by co-host Jay Shabat. In this week's show we're bringing you right up to date with the winners and losers of airline earnings season so far. Hi Jay, how's it going?
All right, good to chat airlines again with you, Gordon.
It's what we do. I was going to say it's what we do best, but I'll leave that for our listeners to decide. Vote with your feet and with your ears, but the feedback in the inbox is good. Jay, we've had a busy flurry of earnings since we last spoke. We are recording here on the 28th of July. Various big names in the US. If you thought it was all over after Delta and United had shared their numbers, no. Plenty more to discuss. American, Southwest, and Alaska were the big highlights from last week. Any opening comments before we get into the details? Go on, set the scene for us, Jay.
I'll run through the headline numbers for you.
Go on.
Just a reminder, Delta and United, 13% and 12% respectively were their operating margins. That's ex special items. So very good for the second quarter, 13%, 12%. Now we're getting into a group of airlines that are having more difficulties. American, they announced an 8% operating margin. So as usual, a few points below Delta and United, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons for their deficit. But honestly, 8% for Q2, that's nothing to hang your head over. That's a pretty decent result. In a few minutes, we're going to talk about why the third quarter, the quarter that we're currently in, is looking a lot worse for American. But put that on hold for a second. Alaska Airlines, based in Seattle, 9%, so even better than American. Mostly, very domestic-oriented airline. They're, venturing into some overseas routes from Seattle. They, of course, have Hawaiian now, which is starting to, I think Hawaiian for the first time really since COVID had a profitable quarter at the operating level. I believe that's the case. So a little bit. I think it was a big profit. It was very thin, but starting to see a turnaround there. But you have to believe the core Alaska routes from Seattle still doing very well. And last but not least, we had Southwest report their second quarter results. Very, very disappointing. 3%. That was about half of what they did last year. It was 5.5 last year for the same quarter. But then if you go back to, pre-pandemic, this was an airline that was doing, 15, 16, 7%, 17% for their second quarter, which is typically their best quarter. Every airline differs a little bit in their seasonality based on the network, where they fly more than others. Southwest always peaks in the second quarter. So to just have a 3% margin is disappointing. But as you'll read in Airline Weekly this week, a lot of the many changes that they're undertaking haven't bore fruit yet. So we should see a lot of synergies, a lot of additional profits come out of those changes in the months and quarters and years ahead. So it's a little bit of a wait and see, but certainly looking back to second quarter, it was not a good one for Southwest. So that is a brief overview of the airlines, the U.S. airlines that have reported their Q2 results so far. If I may, Gordon, I want to ask you a question. I want to take you back in time and ask you a question.
Go on. Yeah.
Right. So we're
how far back in time, Jay?
Not that long. We're going to go back to 2019. So
okay, I think you can manage that. My memory's not as good as it used to be, but 2019 I think I can do.
I think were you still in high school?
Sorry,
I was still in college, and we were much younger back then.
Well, yeah, the pandemic did age me a little bit, but not quite that much. Okay, 2019. Okay, what, go on.
All right, so it's 2019. We're both still youngsters, and the world is our oyster. And if I told you that in 2025, the U.S. airline industry would have a situation of very constrained supply, I would also tell you that fuel prices, would be pretty cheap, reasonably a little bit higher than 2019 levels, but not all that much. And I also told you that the U.S. economy, was performing relatively well. And, you can debate the extent to really how well it's performing. But by the major metrics, I mean, we've talked about how unemployment is pretty low, and stock market's doing well, corporate profits are doing well, et cetera. So it's a pretty solid year. If I told you all of those things, you'd probably say to me, "Oh, Jay, it's probably a wonderful time to be a U.S. airline in 2025." But the reality is, as you know, it's been, somewhat wonderful for Delta and United, and you can argue maybe Alaska as well, a few of the smaller guys like Sun Country. But it's been very, very much less than wonderful for some of these other airlines, including American Southwest. And, without really going into a very long explanation of what's going on here, obviously each airline has its own story. But I do want to just mention two very, very important points here. And they're nothing new. If you've been listening to the Airline Weekly Lounge for a while, and if you've been reading the Airline Weekly newsletter, none of this is going to be new. But 2 points I just want to really pound at, really emphasize. So one is that non-fuel costs have really, really gone up a lot for the industry. And that's something that at some point, some of the airlines may have to take a hard look at. Can they afford these labor contracts that they currently have? Can they afford these, serving some of these expensive airports? Can they afford, in some cases, the fleets that they currently have? I'm not saying anything, any kind of, restructuring is imminent or anything like that. But just keep that in mind that for a lot of these airlines, revenues have increased a lot less than costs have, particularly non-fuel costs. So that's one major point. And the other point I did want to make, it's actually somewhat happy news if you're the right airline anyway. But again, something we've talked about a long time, but premium demand has been the Rock of Gibraltar. That's been just excellent. It hasn't wavered even this year, where we've had some we've certainly had a downturn in government travel. We've had some weakness in non-premium travel. But again, Rock of Gibraltar for premium demand, and especially intercontinental overseas premium demand. So that goes a long way toward explaining why United and Delta have been outperforming. And yes, there's a million other reasons if you start digging into individual airlines, why this airline is underperforming or that airline's doing a little bit better. But just wanted to make those few points. And if I just may go back, some interesting numbers I was looking at. If you compare 2024, so full year 2024 versus 2019, the U.S. economy, all inflation adjusted here, has grown by about 13%. Over that same period, the total number of domestic U.S. seats, this is according to Cirium Dio, has grown only 6%. So 13% versus 6%. GDP 13%, seat capacity 6%. So when I say that industry capacity is rather constrained, I'm not kidding. It's true. And you could make this even more interesting and look at actual number of flight departures. There are actually there were 7% fewer flight departures in the U.S. domestic market in 2024 than there was in 2019. Now, obviously, if you have 7% fewer departures, but you have 6% more ASMs, well, it means you're flying bigger planes, right? A lot more seats per departure, and that's totally what, as you know, a lot of airlines have upgauged. So I know I've spoke a lot there, said a lot, but that is, I think, gives you a picture of where we stand collectively, across the U.S. airline industry here in July of 2025, or I guess August by the time everybody's listening to this.
Yeah, we're at that interesting part of the month where we straddle both. Let's discuss the domestic exposure, Jay, because even the most casual of listeners, I would dare say, knows that American Airlines, of the big three, is the most domestically focused. You could argue some of that is from the pandemic era. They got rid of a lot of the wide-body fleet, some might say prematurely, but it is what it is. American Airlines domestic exposure, discuss.
Sure. Yeah. So first, I'll say that now that we've had sort of the big five carriers for the U.S. that report, we have a pretty good picture of what demand looked like in the second quarter and how it's looking currently in the third quarter. And basically, if you go back to the spring, March, which was Q1, and then April, which was Q2, that was probably the low point, the very weak point for demand. That was when we had, very low levels of consumer confidence tied to, tariff announcements, whatever. And also we had a big drop in stock markets. We had a lot of government layoffs and fears of government layoffs. So we saw just government travel, for example, plummet for U.S. Airlines. Not a huge portion of their total travel, but you could see things were just very, very weak. Let's call it March and April. Now, going into, let's say, May and June, the final 2 months of the second quarter, I like to say, how Las Vegas always says, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. Well, unfortunately, what happened to airline demand in the spring doesn't stay in the spring. It kind of bleeds over into the summer. And sorry for my awkward metaphor, but
no, but bit of a Las Vegas hangover.
Right, the Las Vegas hangover. And what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the tickets booked in May, June, and even into July were booked during that very weak period of consumer confidence back earlier in the spring. So that was a time when airlines were kind of forced to cut fares. And this is something American specifically mentioned, that their July bookings are, look rather weak because a lot of those bookings were made during that week period, a couple months earlier. They also mentioned that some of their international bookings were looking kind of weak because of particularly Europe. A lot of people for that brief period where there was conflict with Iran, a lot of people stayed away from booking Europe. It wasn't a very long period, but that kind of infected, let's say, Q3 bookings, July bookings. So you can see how things can bleed over. But that was the pattern. I just wanted to give everybody a sense of the pattern. You had a very weak, let's say, March and April. Things got better in terms of sentiment, in terms of air travel demand. When you get into June, you get into July. And according to really what everybody's saying, things looking forward into the rest of August and into the fall look pretty good. Even some of the corporate stuff is starting to come back. So there seems to be that better confidence there. The U.S. Airlines seem to be pretty happy with the way bookings are trending now. And they also said, I think your originally question, it was so long ago that I forgot it, but I think you're asking about supply. and I think...
domestic exposure, Jay.
Domestic exposure, that's what it was. Sorry. Yeah, short memory. I will say one thing about supply, though, is that there is optimism that airlines are going to be taking more capacity out. So there's that. Now, domestic exposure. Okay, that's what you're asking. Yeah, so American does have much more domestic exposure than United and Delta specifically, and they cited that as a big reason why their earnings or their margins were inferior to their two big rivals there in Atlanta and Chicago. Is that a fair excuse? Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, you can't deny that they were had greater exposure to a weaker area of the market and much less exposure to the booming intercontinental market. So, yeah, there you go. I think domestic exposure is definitely a reason that American underperformed during the quarter and has been underperforming really ever since we came out of the pandemic.
A reason, Jay, but not the only reason. Any other big highlights? I was going to call it highlights. Maybe a highlight for United and Delta, rubbing their hands with glee in Atlanta and Chicago. Yes, lowlights for the team in DFW for sure. What were the other main factors being a bit of a drag on American's performance?
Well, I jotted down 6 of them, 6 lowlights. So one is the domestic exposure I just mentioned. Another is they did have that big distribution misstep that we've talked about. They pursued a strategy that was very risky and wound up kind of blowing up in their face. They took a very aggressive stance to try to promote direct bookings with travel agencies, corporations. Lost a lot of money from that. They say that they've kind of reversed course and that they're winning back hearts and minds and things are improving, but I don't think they've and I think they would admit this, they haven't completely gotten back to where they were before they initiated this strategy. So that's number 2. 3, they did point out that all of their labor contracts, this is American now, all of their labor contracts have been renewed and go out to 2027, maybe some 2026, whereas United in particular has a few labor contracts that still have to be amended, so they're sort of structured from a previous era, let's say. Now they do have their pilot contract extended. They do, that doesn't become amendable for another year or 2 or 3. They just got a flight attendant deal that's not ratified yet as we're speaking today anyway, on July 28th. But they did account for that in their earnings, so they accrued for the higher cost for that. So, but it's more like the ground workers and the maintenance staff, where United is maybe at a little bit of an advantage over American because they haven't renewed their contracts yet. So, okay, we'll take American's word for it there. They also do have a credit card disadvantage. Their credit card contract with Citi was, as they've said in the past, has been, it's inferior to the latest agreements that Delta has with American Express and that United has with JP Morgan Chase. Now that's going to change, and American has inked a new deal with Citi, but it's not going to start until 2026, January 1st of the new year. So that is arguably a fourth reason for the underperformance. A fifth reason, I do want to point to, American does have a lot of Florida and Caribbean exposure, and they didn't speak about Florida specifically. They mentioned that some of the short-haul Caribbean routes are a little bit soft. Probably no surprise. Now, these markets do extremely poorly in the third quarter. I mean, July is probably okay, but August and September are very, very weak months for Florida and Caribbean because you're getting into hurricane season. Nobody wants to go. It's also extremely hot and sticky down there, and it's the weather's nice up north and all that. So they have a lot of exposure to that. So the third quarter isn't normally going to be worse for them than say United or Southwest, or let's say United, Southwest special case, but for United. However, it certainly doesn't explain why American expects to, their forecast calls for potential loss in the third quarter, which is very alarming considering that Delta and United expect to be solidly profitable. So the gap, at least based on third quarter forecast, the margin gap between American and Delta and United is actually growing. So that should make American a little bit nervous. So I did 1, domestic exposure; 2, the distribution misstep; 3, the labor cost disadvantage; 4, the credit card disadvantage; 5, Florida Caribbean exposure. Number 6, you ready for can we get a drum roll here? I don't know if we have the.
We don't have the budget for that, Jay.
Yeah, we don't have the budget. That's right.
I'll give you a. What can I give you?
You have a pencil to tap on the desk or something?
No, we can't. Not even a pencil.
You don't need a pencil? All right.
I'll give you a drum roll. Go.
Perfect. I think they have a little bit of... they may be running into some problems with their Chicago expansion and perhaps their New York expansion as well. These are very tough markets that they're trying to build back. And we don't know. I mean, as far as, they said that things are, whatever, they're winning frequent flyers there and all. But I do suspect that at least in the short term, they might be losing money as they expand aggressively. And I looked at, Chicago schedules in particular, kind of got my attention because they're throwing a lot of capacity into United's hubs. And so it's like, just really going right into the lion's teeth. And you have to believe that that extra capacity is not going to be very profitable, at least not at first. If American is listening and they want to dispute me, I'm all ears, but I do have that suspicion. So they're your 6. If you want, you can go on. Is perhaps they have a little bit more government exposure because they're big at, Washington Reagan Airport. Maybe there are things, they're very DFW and Charlotte heavy, and maybe some, fundamentals have soured there. I don't know. So I'm not saying that there are only 6 reasons, but those are the 6 I will highlight today.
Thank you, Jay. And more detail, as you might expect, in the latest Airline Weekly issue. Stay tuned because we are going to touch on Southwest and Alaska in part 2. Before that, a quick reminder. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if you are enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review so we can continue to spread the word about the Airline Weekly Lounge. We'll be right back in part 2.
Hey everybody, I'm Sarah Kopit, Editor-in-Chief at Skift, and I've got to be honest with you, I am just blown away by how fast our industry is changing. AI is transforming how people book, platforms are flipping business models and consumer behavior. It is more unpredictable than ever. And that's why I am so excited for this year's Skift Global Forum happening September 16th through 18th in New York City. This year's theme jumps into the future, Travel 2030, people, platforms, and new paths forward. You'll hear from leaders at Booking Holdings, IHG, AirAsia, plus dozens more shaping the future of travel. And this year, we've got more than just stage talks. We've got expert-guided roundtables and new networking formats designed to spark real conversation so you can do real business. Expect it to be more interactive, more personal, and more valuable than ever. Join me and the rest of the industry at Skift Global Forum. Use the code PODCASTS for $800 off the full price at live.skift.com. Hope to see you there.
Hello and welcome back to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm Gordon Smith, joined as usual by Jay Shabat. Part 1, we were discussing American Airlines mostly, a few other bits and pieces in the mix. Part 2, we're going to look at Southwest and Alaska because they also reported last week as we were recording here on July 28th. Jay, what were your top line takes from Southwest? You suggested at the very top of the show that they didn't have a great Q2, but maybe better days ahead.
Yeah, perhaps. As I mentioned before, they have a ton of new initiatives in place, including the bag charges, and the proceeds from that and other new strategies are going to start rolling in over time. And we're talking about, I believe, we're in the hundreds of millions of dollars over, the coming years here. So, that's they're betting that things are going to get better. They also say things look a little brighter on the supply front, industry supply, and in terms of balance sheet, Southwest is still totally rock solid, and I think they're benefiting a lot from selling 737s that they don't, older 737s that they're not in particularly need of right now, and they're probably earning very nice returns on those sales. Given the aircraft shortage, those are in high demand. So yeah, that's things hopefully for them are looking up. I guess the other thing that makes me kind of gets me thinking about Southwest is whether or not they would consider a merger, especially since some of their rivals, JetBlue comes to mind, are very you can have it for pretty cheap right now. And I won't go into it would take too long to go into all the pros and cons of why Southwest might or might not buy JetBlue, why it might or might not be smart. But you have to believe that's at least on their minds. So yeah, that's all I'll say about Southwest. And then Alaska, as I mentioned before, Hawaiian is starting to turn around, but the Hawaiian operation for now is still a drag on earnings. So you have to believe if it was not for Alaska by itself, and they did kind of break it out. I don't know, if you can use this number. I don't know how precise this number is, but they said if you take Alaska by itself, I believe the margin was 12%. So right up there with United and Delta. I mean they're doing really well. And a big question for them is their new long haul from Seattle. They fly into Asia now. Tokyo, Seoul starts pretty soon. They're going to do Rome next summer. And whether or not they can succeed, that's a little bit more risky. That's going to be tough, especially with Delta breathing down their neck.
Oh yes,
yeah. So that's we'll see there. But Alaska, they've got so many things going for them. Their loyalty program has been fantastic. In terms of the earnings power of that, they seem to have just a fantastically loyal following. In Seattle, they're exposed to all this great corporate traffic. Sorry, on the West Coast there in Seattle, which is just such a incredibly strong economy. Maybe not be. Seattle might not be growing as fast as, say, a Dallas, but certainly, in terms of the corporate might of some of the companies based there, and the income's very high and all that. So I think Alaska has a lot going for them.
Yeah, you mentioned Seattle's fairly constrained, Jay, but they are growing in markets like Portland and San Diego.
Yep.
So this I don't even want to call those secondary cities. They're still enormous metropolitan areas and markets in their own right, but non-Seattle markets, Alaska seems fairly open-minded, either through choice or by having their hand forced by the lack of capacity in Seattle to get into these markets. It'll be interesting to see just how much they get into those markets.
Right. And those are always going to be, they're always going to be tougher than Seattle. I mean, it's Portland and San Diego, they're very competitive, and particularly in San Diego where you've got Southwest and very, very strong there. So it's not going to be the same as Seattle, but as you mentioned, Seattle, just the airport really doesn't have any room to grow. And so the only way they can grow is either through larger aircraft, which is, why they're buying some of these larger MAX versions and why they're flying the 787s. Now from Seattle, and speaking of the 787s, I think that was a big reason why they purchased Hawaiian, not the 787 specifically, but to find a new avenue of growth given their Seattle constraints and how those constraints are only going to get worse as time passes.
And I did enjoy in the most recent issue, Jay, your little reference to the Simple Minds song from the 1980s. You were asking me, if we were harking back to 2019, let's go all the way back to whatever that was, 1980. I'm not quite sure. But that's a good
song. Yeah, I heard that song in the car on the radio, and I was like, hey, they must be singing about Alaska.
A great Scottish band, Simple Minds.
They from. I did not know that. Okay.
All the best things are from Scotland, Jay. You know that.
Yeah.
If ever in doubt, it's probably Scottish.
Yeah, I'm not going to dispute that.
No, appreciate.
I won't even make any comments about New Jersey.
Appreciate that quick fire roundup of Southwest and Alaska, Jay. And we should say that looking ahead this week, we've got a bit of a European sizzler coming up. We've got IAG on Friday, but we've got Air France, KLM, and Lufthansa Group both reporting on Thursday. So a very busy European end to this week. Will we have the same situation that we do? Again, you're not to sound like a fanboy, but your title this week on the issue, the American Bronze Age. We could argue we've got a European Bronze Age in many respects, with IAG always out in front, and then maybe Air France, KLM, and Lufthansa battling it out, depending on the quarter for second and third place. But anything that our listeners should be looking out for as we get into the European side of things?
Well, I just want to use this platform to send a message to all airlines. Every time you report your earnings on a Friday, just want you to know that you ruin Gordon's weekend and my weekend. So, just consider that.
I mean, we could change the date of the podcast being recorded and putting out, but no, let's get an enormous multi-billion-dollar corporation to change their corporate earnings.
Yeah, well, I've had weekends ruined for 25 years now doing this, so I think I can handle it.
Take a leaf out of Valeri's book. That was beautiful last Monday.
Yeah, Monday. Oh, I love the Monday earnings reports.
Love the Mondays. But yeah, anything top line that we should be keeping an eye out for European wise as we get into those super groups reporting towards the end of the week?
Not European. No, we'll wait and see on that. But Singapore Airlines. Speaking of Monday reporting, we're speaking on a Monday today, July 28th, and Singapore reported today, and I'll tell you they did pretty well, but things are kind of regressing from where they were. And that has something to do with lower yields due to higher competition, but more competition, and some issues on the cargo side. But we will talk about. They also talked about non-fuel cost inflation as well. But we'll write more about that in the upcoming issue of Airline Weekly for sure. Singapore Airlines. But no, I'm ready on the European side. I'm ready to just see how the big three did as usual. And if always curious to hear, how some of the transatlantic markets are faring, because the U.S. guys are all saying that transatlantic markets have started to wobble a little bit over the past, couple of months, particularly on the non-premium side. And some of the, even, speaking of Europe, some of the European carriers in the Nordic region, like Iceland Air, have said the same thing. So it'll be curious to see what IAG, Air France, and Lufthansa have to say. Obviously, IAG extremely exposed to the U.S. market, but we won't know that until Friday.
No, we won't. But thanks for that scene setter, Jay. Much appreciated. And as Jay says, more detail in the next issue of Airline Weekly, but you'll need to pay for that. No more freebies. Let's just give you a quick reminder of that email address, podcast@skift.com, if you've got any questions or comments that you might have for us. And the other little address you need to know is live.skift.com. That's where you can get all the details of our upcoming events. We're going to be in New York City in September for the Skift Global Forum, and we're also going to be back in Fort Worth in Texas in very early December. Hee-haw! For the Skift Aviation Forum. The programming team are putting together the agendas for those events right now, but if you want to see who's on the list so far with more to come, live.skift.com. And a quick reminder that Airline Weekly subscribers get one free in-person ticket to the Skift Aviation Forum. So we'd love to see you again there. All the details and dates and everything else, live.skift.com. Thanks, Jay, for joining me this week. And thanks again to our producers, Monica, Doug, and Cole, and wherever you are in the world. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. Whether you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, please make sure to subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave us a positive review. This really helps us get the word out about the Airline Weekly Lounge, so we can continue to bring you this podcast every week, absolutely free of charge. And if you're watching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the Skift channel and hit the notification bell to find out whenever a new video drops.